I wanted to ask you, too, about persons important to the movement today, persons in the past who have been important, and persons who you see who are on the cutting edge and helping move it along.
Well, there are legions, and it would be very difficult to recall without some preparation who they are.
Well, I like your answer about it being there being legions out there. You had also, though, talked about land-grant universities moving more toward interest in research in sustainable agriculture. Do you see this as a very strong movement?
Well, it's difficult to characterize. I think it has to be kept in perspective. And my benchmark is the 1980 period, when there was virtually no targeted interdisciplinary research on low-input organic systems. It'd be very difficult to find any. I looked, and I really couldn't find any. Warren Saw's work at Mead perhaps being the exception. So if you compare it to that, then there has been indeed an enormous increase. But in absolute terms, it is still relatively small.
Yes.
I don't have budget figures, but in connection with the federal program, just that alone, the LISA budget this year I think is $6.7 million. And I'm not quite sure what the exact total federal appropriation is for agricultural research and education, but it must be around $1.5 billion, somewhere in that range.
Yes.
Of course, some of the officials in USDA believe that they're spending millions and millions of dollars on this kind of research.
Already.
A matter of dispute, obviously. It depends an awful lot on how you define it, whether it's really interdisciplinary. It doesn't help, for example, to at least in my view, it doesn't help to say that research on soil compaction is sustainable agriculture research if the research has to do with solving the problem through the development of a deeper chisel type cultivation implement. So rather than restoring the tilth of the soil through rotation. So is that sustainable agriculture research or not? And I guess we'll continue to argue about those matters. But at least the word sustainable agriculture has become quite commonplace, and it has been embraced and endorsed by almost every organization, including those in the agrochemical industry, just within the past 2 or 3 years. And in some ways there are some problems and some dangers in that, because the word, which desperately needs better definition, has become, I think, increasingly unclear just in the past 2 or 3 years.
As more and more co-opted, perhaps?
Well, to some degree, I think it has. Definitely.
I remember speaking of the budget at the conference in 1988 downtown at the Ag Building. The budget, I think someone referred to what was allotted to the LISA program as being not a drop in the bucket, but a vapor. Was it you who said that? It was just
no, that sounds a little bit too dramatic for me, but that's not a bad way to describe it. It certainly isn't a large amount of money, but as you know, it has attracted an enormous amount of interest.
Yes.
I can think of no federal programs that have engendered that sort of a response and enthusiasm for so little money. Rarely has so little money done so much for so many. It's really been a remarkable story. It's a remarkable story
on the subject, and it's a remarkable story of the recognition from elsewhere on the subject of sustainable agriculture. And I'm coming now to ask you about the MacArthur Award, which came to you as a bolt out of the blue, I understand?
Well, they all do. You get a phone call. You don't know you've been nominated. Don't know you're under consideration at all. So it's a very shocking kind of an experience. But
you just picked up the
now
phone
that the shock is past, I recognize it as an honor, and very fortunate and happy, obviously, to have received it.
And but literally, the phone just rings, and you pick it up, and someone says,
"It's like the old television
Dr.
show."
Youngberg? Really?
Yes.
Well, I think that it was certainly well deserved, but I confess to a little prejudice. I wanted to talk again about the future. I know that you do a lot of. You're asked to speak a lot, and you also still do a lot of writing. What do you consider to be the main focus of your work?
Well,
writing, speaking,
oddly enough, one would think that with as much progress as there has been, that the character of the writing and the speaking would have changed a lot over the last decade, but there still seems to be a central need to keep telling the story. There are so many more groups now that are tiptoeing into this field who are still relatively at the beginning stage, or who do not understand the subject very well. And so I find it necessary to go back over the basics. That might surprise you after all this time. But I think it's because of the broadening nature of the groups and organizations that have heard about this and want to know about it, and is it viable and what's it all about. So I still find myself addressing the myths that it's, yes, you can grow 120 or 130 acre bushel corn to the acre, and no, we're not talking about going back to the agriculture of the 1930s, and yes, organic farmers do use tractors, and but that's because the more central actors, of course, have acquired that knowledge and know that, and they're at another level of research and activity. But here at the Institute, where our job is sort of outreach and trying to continue to communicate with a broader and broader cross-section of people, and particularly consumers. We haven't talked about that, but they've become such an important part of this movement, and many of them don't know a great deal about agriculture.
No, well,
so it's still necessary to go back over the basics with many of these.
Your last conference this year focused on food.
Yes.
And that certainly was more consumer-oriented.
Yes, and I think consumers will play an increasingly important role in this movement as we go on down the road. I don't think they're going to be the sole player, or perhaps even the single most dominant. I think that's overestimated, frankly, to some degree. But they're certainly an important part of it. So those groups, environmental groups, preservationist type groups, there are just so many now that have some interest in this, that continues to encourage.
Isn't there a bumper sticker that says, if you eat, you're involved in agriculture?
That's right. That's for sure. And I think more and more people are beginning to understand that.
I sense that you feel very hopeful about the direction of the next few years.
Yes, I do, but I guess I would say that in some ways the gains of the last decade were made without enormous opposition, without a lot of organized opposition. Yes. I think the LISA appropriation, for example, sort of slipped under the door. And as there still are agricultural interests out there who would be disadvantaged, obviously, economically, if there were to be wide-scale adoption of these systems throughout the country. And I think as they have sensed that this is not a transient kind of issue, that there's some real substance here, and that some very serious people, some good scientists, some important policymakers are looking at this, that there is now in the country a kind of countervailing organizational response to this that could make future gains much more difficult than we might think, given all of the credibility that's been built up over the years in support of this.
The stronger it becomes, the stronger the
That's
opposition
right.
will become.
Absolutely. That's the way American politics works.
Yes. Yes, unfortunately or fortunately, that is the way it works. Do you have any thoughts or things you'd like to say to anybody looking at this conversation, say, 50 years from now or 10 years from now?
Well, my crystal ball is clouded, as I'm sure yours is. I think perhaps I shouldn't have said yours, maybe yours is clear, but most people have a fairly clouded crystal ball when they look that far down the road. I think what we today call organic systems and low input systems will change over the years in terms of the inputs that are allowed, so-called materials list. We now have this national standard which is going to be developed under the 1990 Farm Bill, and that new technological developments, particularly in the area of biological inputs and biological control, will alter the nature of what we think of as organic systems. I think that's very positive, though, and will enhance their credibility and their potential for adoption. I'd like to see a lot more involvement in the next decade on the part of social scientists. Perhaps that's a bias of mine, but I think over the last 10 years, enough good agronomists, outstanding agronomists, and soil scientists and so forth, have looked at these systems and have documented them and spoken out in their behalf to the point where there's credibility now in the sense that we know people can farm this way and be productive and make money. And the question now becomes, how many can do that? Of what are the social and personal and psychological characteristics of these managers? What would happen if we had wide-scale adoption? What would be the implications of that? By the way, we'll have a report coming out soon that begins to look at that. But as we look down the road to these broader macro issues, we really are in desperate need of much better research from economists and rural sociologists that can inform us about these consequences, because I think none of us, that is, those of us who would be thought of as proponents, do not want to lead farmers down the primrose path.
No.
That's the last thing we want to do. We want facts, and we want research of all across the board. And so that would be what I would hope will begin to happen to a much larger degree in the next decade and beyond.
Well, I think if it does, and I hope it does, that it will be because of people like you. And I don't know anyone else like you, Garth, so I don't know why you say that. You were quoted as saying that you believe that balance and choice can be restored to American agriculture.
Yes.
And I would hope that you would continue to work on that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.